open forum, and I'll take a couple of questions from the audience, but I just want to ask the first one. You sort of skipped over it a bit, Brendan. In one of your tables you had, I think it was 450 to 500 kilos of supplement, sort of ineffectively as a recommended Irish system. The Irish climate's very similar to Southland in terms of grass growth curve. And so Brendan and maybe John, you want to comment, is it 0 or is it 500 kilos? Like what's the story there?
Yeah, I suppose the way we do it is that farmers on average are using a ton today. All right. Now whether the figure should be 0 or should be somewhere between 0 and 500, I'm happy to have that debate. But from where they are today, it needs to be half or less than it currently is. And I suppose that's why we've set targets over the next 10 years, and one of those targets is to get back down to 500 kilos of supplement. And we get there, we can talk about going further, but it's just, I suppose, to be more pragmatic in terms of dealing with, we're not talking about absolute numbers. It's the direction is more important than the actual number today.
Very good.
Yeah, I agree with what Brendan said there. There's a thought resonating memory resonating in my head, where I spent Easter weekend, my family and I spent Easter weekend with a farming family that we're good friends with, and I was after coming back from a visit to a farming business, and I had an hour and a half in the car alone as I was driving to the batch, and running this farming business I was coming from fed no supplements. I was just watching the expansion, I was watching the money flow, the bottom of it, and by the time I got to the beach, I was just ready to have a great conversation about this. My friend, on the other hand, feeds a heck of a lot of maize silage and a heck of a lot of palm kernel, and he stopped me about halfway through the conversation. He said, look, I see what you're saying, I have great appreciation for the person you're talking about, but I couldn't drop to no supplements. The stress of spring would kill me. And I think what Brendan's describing there, that type of system, it allows a little bit of the human factor to come into it. People struggle through August and September here in mid-Canterbury, where we see big swings in soil temperatures and big swings in grass growth rate from week to week. I think a small amount of supplement in the system facilitates the human factor in farming. There's no question about it. I do think, though, the 500 kilos is a good stake in the ground, and I think it would be right that we debate beyond that. 500 kilos is approximately 10% of the diet of the cow. If 10% of the diet of the cow doubles in price, it shouldn't break the profit and loss account. Or if milk price halves, you should be able to take out 10% of the diet of the cow, or half of 10% of the diet of the cow, and the system doesn't fall apart biologically. So I think it is a very good benchmark.
Okay, thanks guys. Okay, we'll take a couple of questions. A little bit hard to see, so I'll be relying on our microphone.
Show Tony.
Runners. Tony? Show.
Yeah, thanks guys, and thanks for the summit. I think it's excellent, and the focus on pasture is probably going to be the key, and the focus around the level of supplement. Just one thing that hasn't been mentioned here, and it's just an observation that I see on farms around maximising pasture grown and getting utilisation, and I see, particularly in Canterbury, people not grazing at the right time. And maybe John, you've got all the science around it, difference between grazing at the 2-leaf stage versus 2.5 or 3-leaf stage. It actually hasn't been mentioned, but there's a huge, huge difference in what people can grow. And I think we're actually missing a little bit of an opportunity here, and I don't think it's actually been mentioned here. Your comment?
Yeah, look, you're right, Tony. I mean, you summed it up well. Most people are probably familiar with the discussion that went on about, instead of judging your rotation length on days, that you judge it on where the ryegrass is at in its growth phase. So a ryegrass grows 3 live leaves as the 4th leaf pops out, the first dies, so you're getting no benefit after the 3rd leaf. But up to that 3rd leaf, nitrogen dependent, granted, but up to at least 2.5 leaves, you're getting an exponential phase of growth, so you're growing a huge amount of grass. And if you're grazing much earlier than that, then you're actually losing out, and Tony, I think, is your point. That's absolutely right, and it's one of the things. The other thing about it from a Canterbury perspective, which you know far better than me, is when you do run into those drops in soil temperature, if you're out grazing out at 2.5 leaves, you've got a far bigger buffer to be able to weather those undulations in the grass growth curve. If you pull your rotation line back to 16 to 18 days, once magic day hits, then you are really, really open to a short-term reduction in grass growth. So I think there's two advantages to it. Number one, you increase your grass growth by being out those longer rounds, and you protect the business, the biological part of the business. So I agree with you on.
Okay, thanks, John. Tony, any questions? Any other questions? Okay, we've got. We've got one at the back, and then.
Is that you, Horan? Jesus, did you get up?
If I was a farmer that invested in concrete feeders, I've come here today. I've thought, crikey, I've invested in all that. I want to reset the feed, press reset, and I've got that money invested. What advice would you have for me when I've got this capital tied up and my bank manager's leaning on me, etc.?
I'll give it to Brendan, but I'll give you a quick answer. I would advise you to spend about $3,500 and hop on a plane to the UK, and I can give you contacts all the way from Ayrshire down through Cheshire, Pembrokeshire into Somerset and Cornwall, of guys that were in exactly that same situation over the last 20 years, turned their back completely on their concrete because they knew they weren't making any money on it, and turned to the type of system that we're talking about here today. These guys have, guys and girls have cojones the size of elephants to have done what they did, but have come out the other side fantastically. So my answer, Olin, is I wouldn't continue to run a poorly performing operating business to make up for a bad investment decision I made historically.
Yeah, completely agree with that. It's certainly a lot easier to not make that investment in the first place, and to when you see in a European context, when you look at the infrastructural investments that have been made, I really, when you look at European researchers, you could have anyone from France or Germany here, and they'd be telling you much the same story about the biology and the environment and so on, but their farmers are still kind of drifting in the other direction, and a lot of it is about the sunk investments and trying to justify them, and trying to continue to justify them. So yeah, don't make the investment, but if you do, don't compound it by continuing to have unprofitable systems. I think that's all we can say about that.
Okay, so that's a little bit like if I was going there, I wouldn't start here. Okay, we do have a question in the middle, but just while the microphone goes there, I'm just going to take this top one, and then we'll come to the middle. I think it's a really good one because it's a really positive message. Why do we avoid telling the story to consumers of the environmental benefits of pastoral grazing systems? And I'll just add, when in some cases the public actually see that there's a lot of detrimental effects to cows being out grazing.
Yeah, so I suppose in my mind at the moment, and maybe Ireland is just a few years behind New Zealand in the need for this, but I don't think we're telling any story to consumers. We're not good at telling our story, and so that's number one. And we need to really develop it. It's not a story. Sounds like some sort of fictional thing. This is about informing people who want good food produced in clean ways about what we do and how advantageous that is. So there's nothing in this that's not tangible and real. Okay, but we need to do it, and we're not doing it well enough. So that's the first thing. But the second thing in terms of the environmental benefits is, there's a big focus just in the last 2 weeks and in previous visits to New Zealand on the nitrate leach, and that is certainly something we have to manage. And nitrate is the weakness of a grazing system. So that's fine, and we need to do better in terms of nitrate leaching and so on. What does better in terms of nitrate leaching actually is the simple things, like we've talked about during the presentations. But there's a whole other story there around carbon, and the full picture actually is much more about balancing carbon and nitrogen. And a farmer said to me, a couple of months ago, I was kind of bemoaning that this focus on nitrate a little bit, and he goes, let's go back and tell the European Parliament we want to plough the place up, put in maize. That'll solve the nitrate problem. But hold on a second, look what we're doing to the overall conservation of our systems. So carbon's just as big a problem for food production. Grassland is one of the big benefits of doing that, so it's about restricting the nitrate loss, but focusing on the full system and its integrity, and grazing systems deliver that.
So just add just one small thing to that. We tend to be so I agree with everything Brendan has said, and I do think we need to tell our story well. But we are hypersensitive to negative stories about dairying in the press because they're attacking us, and we feel sensitive to that. Now, I'm probably going to get the statistic wrong, so John Willett can correct me on this. But DairyNZ ran a survey last year. I think it was DairyNZ that ran the survey anyway. It springs to mind that across the urban readers of newspapers, there was something like 60 to 70% of them had no recollection of a bad news story about dairying in the papers. So we see them because they're attacking us. They stand out like they're in red print. But your average Aucklander or your average Christchurch person doesn't actually even see them. So I just, don't think that the world is against us. The vast majority of New Zealanders still believe that dairy farmers do the right thing. Maybe we could do things better, but that we are actually a really important part of our community. So I think just take that bow. But I do agree. I think we need to tell our story much better than we have.
I'm farming in Australia.
Our commiserations.
Yeah, that's all right.
At least you're not playing rugby there.
Yeah, no. Yellow's not a nice colour. So under an intensive pasture grazed operation over there, where you sort of we can grow a lot of grass under irrigation. So generally high stocking rate. 2,350 kilos of live weight per hectare. We're using everything, every bit of grass. We have got availability in the past of cheap supplements. Is there a rule of thumb regarding where that supplementary price should be? Because we don't make silage on the farm. We do need a bit, into the autumn and all that sort of stuff, and maybe very early spring at the very most. Or should I just drop the stocking rate down?
Eisenhower had a very interesting quote where he said that farming is mighty easy when your plough is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from the farm. So to make that judgment for you sitting in a nice comfy chair here would be really difficult, obviously. I think one of the things I learned during my time in Australia is there are no cheap supplements. So that's one thing to bear in mind. But a good conversation with a farmer up in the Waikato after we had done this presentation kind of solidified for me that certainly from a New Zealand context, and again, I'm not completely sure from Australia and where it should be, that if we can produce milk for less than $4 a kilo total costs, then I'm confident that the margin of milk we're producing by using supplements is actually not greater than the milk price in most years. Okay, if we drop to $3.90 again, then obviously that's going to be different. So that's what I would judge it on. What is your average cost of production? And if milk price were to come tumbling down, as you guys have great experience of as well, obviously, is the business secure? If it's not, then there's probably too much supplements. And the reason why there's too much supplements is it's not because supplements are a problem. It's because there's a part of a cow, or maybe a full cow, or there's a part of a cow that's being fed completely from outside the farm gate. And that part of that cow is bringing a huge amount of expenses with her other than the feed. And so that's why that margin on milk is so expensive. 60% of your costs are per cow costs. Your vet, your med, your AI, your labour, all those things are per cow costs. So if we're feeding a part of a cow from completely outside the farm gate, generally speaking, that milk is expensive. And I didn't probably explain that well enough when I explained it.
Yeah, I suppose in the background to your question, there's a kind of an inference that farmers like systems that are in a kind of a state of flux, that we're going to respond to this short-term opportunity here, and we back out of that again when the situation arises and so on. To my mind, there's no evidence for that. Every study that's been done that I've seen in New Zealand and Ireland that has looked at this have said farmers want systems that are, in the long term, really stable. They don't want to be changing around what they're doing. They want to do something, to do it well, and to improve upon it gradually over time. And I suppose my issue with the focus on maybe the cheap supplement or the high milk price, number one, the milk price that you're going to get 6 months down the road, we don't know what it is. So it's hard. This is really, that's one risk with it. But the second one is, if you're focused on those kind of things, it's what you're not focused on that's driving your business. That's the real worry for me, that you're taking your head off of what you should be focused on, which is pasture eating and low cost of production.
Okay, we'll take one more from the audience, then we'll take one from the screen. Any hands going up? No, I'll give you a little bit more time to think. I'll jump up here for now. And John, this is probably for you. You've been involved in the Northland work. What was the marginal milk cost in the recent Northland trial, and why did they get 120 gram response rate?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. So I'm going to be approximating in terms of the marginal milk, because I don't have the figures absolutely in my head. But when we were being paid $3.90 a kilo of milk solids, the cost of the marginal milk was about $5.50. When we were being paid $6.15 per kilo of milk solids, the cost of the marginal milk was around $6.30. There wasn't a huge difference between the grass only and the pan. I should actually let me explain for those of you that don't know. There's a demonstration farm in Northland where we ran a research experiment over 3 years, and we compared cows on grass only, cows on grass plus higher stocking rate and grass plus pan kernel, or the same higher stocking rate but using crops, turnips, fodder beet, maize silage, things like that, to try and feed the cow from within the farm gate. And so the marginal cost of the milk on the pan kernel treatment was $5.50 in the first year, $6.30 in the second year, and I think around $4.75 or $4.50 in that third year. So it's not consistent. I think that's fair, particularly in Northland. I mean, that is a difficult place to farm. Not only the clays, but the intermittent weather patterns. Why did we get 120 grams? Well, in 1 year we got 150 grams. And that was the last year of the experiment. And the reason for that was primarily, you guys remember, not this spring just gone, the spring beforehand? Yeah, well, we got one shower of rain that winter. It started on the 1st of April and it finished on the 31st of October. And I kid you not, the collector drains were full on the 1st of April, and they did not drain any one iota until the end of October. It's the worst spring I've seen since my spring in Australia in '97, where we were ploughing paddocks to get cows to graze. And so what we had to do was our grass-only treatment. No supplements came in. We managed it in a welfare compliant and a welfare responsible way. We put them on once-a-day milking. So our pan kernel treatment peaked at 1.85, the same as they had done the 2 years beforehand. The year before, our grass farmlet had peaked at 1.7 kilos of milk solids a cow. That year they peaked at 1.3. So once-a-day milking, a horrendous spring. Cows that were eating, I don't want to say underfed cows, but they were eating less than they would have if I'd given them some more feed. And therefore we got enormous responses to supplement in that year. The year beforehand we got 110 grams, and the year before that we got about 125 grams. And the reason for those two high responses, in my opinion, I don't have an absolute answer to this, in my opinion, is for those of you that haven't visited Northland in January, February and March, you should. It's beautiful, the fishing is magnificent, but the pasture is shit. It is kikuyu dominant, it is horrendous. And so our rule of thumb was until cows were grazing below 3.5, they didn't get any pan kernel. 3.5 centimeters. 3.5 centimeters of kikuyu is like eating that thing. So we got really good responses.
Yeah, the return on essence is excellent in Northland.
Absolutely.
Just saying. Okay.
And when it doesn't rain, the fishing's good.
Okay, is there any other hands going up? And even if we're up on the screen here, the microphone runners will just feed the microphone into you. So.
Yeah, hi. In Canterbury here, we have Synlait offering premiums for not feeding palm kernel and also sort of grass-fed contract through munchkins. Do you think that's a potential solution for the industry here in terms of processes offering premiums?
Yeah, so we have much the same in Ireland as well. Actually, bigger emphasis on producing milk from grass-fed product. So, and to me, that's creating that link between what happens on the farm and the product that people want to buy in the shelf. So I think that's fantastic, but I think we have to develop it even further from where we are today. I think that's just the thin end of the wedge in terms of all of this.
And look, I agree. And if our figures are right, and I'm sure, look, there's variability. I know there's guys in the audience here doing extremely well feeding cows supplements. So I'm not suggesting that people can't make money feeding supplements. But if our figures are right, even for 75% of New Zealand, then the cost of the marginal milk is greater than our base milk price. So if those companies are actually paying a premium to not produce that marginal milk, then obviously it's a no-brainer.
Okay, I'll come out here in a minute, but I'll just John, just quickly, and this could be quite a long question around this marginal milk. So can you try and really
nail it down? Yeah, like it is really difficult. It's one of the beauties of working in research and working across large databases is we get to try and take out a lot of the variability and just look at things that are relatively consistent. And Mark Neal and Lauren Shalhoub will present on this tomorrow as well. So if you're back tomorrow, there'll be a good detailed conversation about this. My suggestion, if you've changed your system through time, then you have the opportunity to go back and calculate it on your own farm, just with your accounts, or if you do DairyBase or Red Sky, you can do it through that, where you look at your cost of production relative to your milk production, your total cost of production for the farm, divided by your milk production, and that gives you your average cost. And then if you've produced more milk, you can take that total cost off your total cost in that next year when you've produced more milk, and divide your total cost into the milk that's been produced. Come to me afterwards.
Okay,
I'll explain. My other suggestion is get a group of like-minded people together so that you can get together, share your own accounts, and actually look at what is the difference in the cost of production. Just like New Zealand used to do 20 to 30 years ago, and Ireland has actually surpassed them in terms of sharing that type of private information now. But I think that's the best way, is get a group of like-minded people together, and you'll grow off each other by comparing your accounts and your business systems. I'm happy to talk about it after over
there's
beer tonight.
there's a couple of people down here just volunteering on a whiteboard to do it after the session, so
Excellent.
run through it.
Do it on a whiteboard with a bottle of beer.
Everyone's looking down.
I'm not buying the beer.
Okay, I think I was coming over here. Very much. Okay.
Yeah, hi John. Just a quick question. Just getting back to basics of grass. So I'm pretty sure Lincoln University, they did a write-up about mixing your diploids and tetraploids together. Do you do much work with that? They're saying that we can get a good residual if we're grazing, pre-grazing covers about 3,600. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, Joel, I'll pass it to Brendan actually, because they've done a lot of work on that in Moorepark.
Yeah, so we've done a study very recently where we've compared, actually Mike made reference to there, the grass clover work, but in that study there was actually a comparison of diploid and tetraploid swards in terms of the impact of that on productivity, quality and so on, and we found almost no difference, exactly no difference, I should say. The clover contributed 1.5 tons of extra grass growth and 50 kilos of extra milk solids a cow, and in comparison, whether you had a tetraploid sward or a diploid sward, you had no difference. So that kind of puts it in context, the relative merits of those two factors in terms of your production system. I don't think we're doing well enough, certainly if we look back in terms of new grasses and so on. I don't think the ploidy is necessarily the factor, but I think, we need to trial grasses under grazing and, really deliver better productivity improvement. I'm confident that we're kind of settling to do that now in research.
Okay, well look, we've got time for one more question, and I hate to prioritise because there's two really good questions there. The top one around the Irish situation in the winter. If it's okay, I'm going to skip over that one, but please come and talk to any of the Irish people and ask about that. Second question there, do you think there is any correlation between increased supplementary feeding and reducing reproductive performance, particularly here in Canterbury?
I don't know. And that's the honest answer. The years where we have fantastic springs and we feed the snot out of cows and they peak at 2.3 kilos of solids and we're roaring through a production season like this, and I don't want to jinx anybody here, tends to be the years where we have really bad reproduction. So there's no doubt there's a combat between cow producing milk and a cow getting pregnant, and so if we drive greater milk production out of a cow, say if you took the extreme, the North American system, they think they're really lucky if they get conception rates of between 25 and 30%. And so they throw massive amounts of hormones at cows, pro sink, off sink, kitchen sink, everything to try and get that conception rate up. And then you come back to our lower input systems, and we tend to have conception rates of 55 to 60%. So you've got, there's no doubt about it, those extremes of milk production do undermine reproduction just because of the metabolism of the cow. Whether we're feeding enough supplements in Canterbury to drive that milk production to negatively affect reproduction, I really don't know.
Just to add to that, there is French work with the wrong Holstein, the real extreme Holstein type of cow to show consistently with higher supplementation, increased embryonic loss and poorer fertility. So it's entirely possible.
And Bill Fulkus's work in New South Wales and Australia showed the same thing. The cows that were getting grain, they cycled earlier, but they had greater embryo loss. What they call the Nottingham fertility diet, and I see a number of nutritionists around Canterbury referring to the Nottingham fertility diet, which is suggesting that feeding grain gets more cows pregnant. The Nottingham fertility diet was explicit. You fed grain to get cows cycling, and then you stopped feeding them grain. You fed them a fermentable fibre source like Pasture to actually get them pregnant. So look, there is good evidence out there that, but I just don't know at what level that happens. That's why I don't want anybody going home that's feeding a kilo of meal thinking, shit, I haven't got my cows pregnant because I was feeding a kilo of meal. That's unlikely. But if you're feeding 6 or 7 kilos of meal through mating to try and get cows pregnant, I would suggest that probably is negatively affecting your reproduction.
Okay, John and Brendan, I just really want to say thank you very much for what you've done. I've just got a couple of quick summary points. I think for me, the story around the environmental, the potential, and I'll use the word story, the potential story around pasture-based dairying and the positive effects on the environment. I think Brendan, you've really brought that through as something that's got great potential, and it's quite an exciting message that we haven't captured. I think, John, you've been pushing this sort of concept of the marginal cost of that milk, and I think we haven't really grabbed hold of that and understand that well enough. And so I think there's huge mileage that we need to really understand that better. And I think by your definition earlier, there's probably a few of us that don't quite understand that well enough. Not you, I don't mean you. And I just think the alignment of the conclusions between the research in the two countries really gives us confidence that the messages that are coming out are strong and correct. So thank you very much. If you can all put your hands together.